Yugoslavia, Palestine, Yemen, and Armenia. What do these places have in common? They have all been the locations of some of the worst conflicts over the last century. They were also all part of the Ottoman Empire, whose influence reached them through the power of the Janissaries. Even still, the Janissaries are a widely unknown topic, with few people fully understanding their responsibilities in the military and the excessive rights granted to them. This documentary seeks to uncover those secrets, not only of their successes, but of their failures that ultimately led to not only their downfall, but the downfall of the Ottoman Empire as a whole. The Janissary Corps were founded in 1383 by Sultan Murad I, when he created the Devshirme system. Under this system, Christian and Jewish boys were sent as tributes to the Sultan, who trained them in the art of warfare and assimilated them into the Ottoman society. Their training made them formidable opponents to face in war, which gave them the responsibility of serving the Ottoman military and as the Sultan's personal guard. For this, they were granted very high wages and far more rights than they had before joining the corps, as Christians and Jews, though tolerated, had a low standing in the empire's society. The first major conquest of the Janissaries that brought them fame was the Ottoman siege of Constantinople in 1453. The empire proved successful in this siege, where many others had failed, through the power of gunpowder, a newly acquired good bought from traders along the Silk Road. Gunpowder allowed the Ottomans to use cannons, which were especially useful for blowing away the wall surrounding the city. With the wall gone, the Janissaries would act as the primary invading force, using their might gained from their intense training to conquer the city. Over the next century and a half, the Ottoman Empire further widened its borders, leading to more acquisitions in the southern Middle East, the Balkans, the South Caucasus, and northern Africa, largely thanks to the Janissaries who successfully fulfilled their responsibility of serving as the empire's primary military force. It was around this time that the Janissaries were granted the right to marry. Previously, they had not been given this right to ensure their loyalty to the kingdom, as a spouse could divert this loyalty. However, they now had many works to show for their loyalty, allowing them to gain this right through negotiations with the Sultan. The Janissaries now saw that they had great influence over the Sultan, causing them to attempt to further increase their rights. When they failed at negotiations, they revolted, using their high influence, numbers, and military strength to fight back against the Sultan. While they didn't succeed in all of these rebellions, some of them were widely successful. However, these successful uprisings were often supported by the public, suggesting that although the Janissaries were highly influential, they were still less influential than the Sultan, requiring the assistance of the masses to hold successful revolts. With most of their revolts seeking to increase their access to wealth, the Janissaries struggled to gain public support, leading to fewer uprisings throughout the 18th century than the 17th century. Around this time, the Ottoman Empire was also slowly losing its global influence, with the Age of Exploration emphasizing the importance of a strong navy, the most lacking part of the Ottoman military. This led to the end of the constant Ottoman raiding, as they no longer had access to any easily gainable land. Still, the Janissaries had been highly successful in the 17th century, granting themselves many rights, including great wealth, high societal status, and political power, but losing some of their wartime responsibilities as they now focused more on their jobs in the Ottoman court than they did on military expeditions. However, at the beginning of the 19th century, the Sultan attempted to modernize the Ottoman military. The Janissaries, who had achieved great political influence, economic power, and lowered their responsibilities with the old ways, opposed these new changes that lowered their rights and increased their responsibilities. This led to chaos throughout the empire, as the Janissaries attempted to prevent this reform from being enacted, going to war with the rest of the empire, who all supported this reform. Ultimately, the conflict was put to an end in 1826, when Sultan Mahmud II officially disbanded the Janissary Corps, a military faction that had once been the pride of the empire, and had now become corrupt with excessive rights and few responsibilities. Without their primary military force, the Janissaries, the Ottoman Empire began to fall. The Ottomans had long been the enemies of the primarily Christian Europe, including Russia, so they faced a lot of pressure from the north. Seeking to increase their defenses, the Tanzimat reforms were enacted in 1839. These reforms led to an increased taxation of the general public to fund the military. Furthermore, they granted non-Muslims rights that they had previously lacked in an attempt to appease Christian Europe. However, the increased taxes on the population slowly began to cause anger among the public against the administration of the empire. The Tanzimat reforms continued to be advanced late into the 19th century. However, when the Ottomans attempted to increase the rights of minorities, an unrelated crisis prevented this from being noticed. Like in 1856, when non-discriminatory educational reforms were obscured by the far more noticeable Crimean Wars. The Ottoman Empire continued to struggle for the rest of the 19th century, with no advancements being made, only barely managing to maintain its borders. This ultimately was put to an end in the early 20th century when the Ottomans sided with the Central Powers in World War I, the losers of the war. In this war, the Ottomans were completely surrounded, leading to them losing all of their land outside of Anatolia, and putting the empire into crisis. During the war, the Ottomans enacted one of the most brutal genocides of the 20th century, the Armenian Genocide. This attack against the Armenian people was brought about largely due to their Christian religion, and fears of them allying themselves with the Russians against the Ottoman Empire. Throughout this genocide, the Armenian people had their property impounded and were forced on death marches. Furthermore, outright massacres were commonplace, and many people simply starved to death due to the lack of proper supplies. This conflict came to an end around the end of World War I, but ultimately led to the creation of the term genocide, and is now remembered as the first of the modern genocides. The empire, now in turmoil, fell quickly, with the new nation of Turkey forming in its place in 1923. The rest of the land that made up the previous Ottoman territories was now split up by the victors of war. However, the borders drawn ignored the language, cultural, and even religious borders that were already in place, leading to frequent conflicts throughout many of these territories. For example, the North Yemen Civil War in the 1960s was partially caused by the Sunni-Shia divide within Yemen itself. The two sides of the conflict almost fell exactly on the divide between these two sects of Islam. Additionally, the Israel-Palestine conflict was largely caused by the UN forcefully migrating Jews back to their homeland of Israel. However, this land already had settlers, the Palestinians, who were not pleased with the new Jewish state forming in their territory. This led to frequent disputes between the two groups of people, disputes that continue to this day. While the Ottoman Empire isn't fully to blame for these conflicts, besides the Armenian Genocide, their failure as an empire laid the foundation for a great conflict in the Middle East and other territories like the Balkans, with the splitting of Yugoslavia in the 1990s. The Janissaries are then to blame for the fall of the Ottoman Empire, as their frequent revolts created discourse throughout the empire, and their disbandment, brought about by these revolts, left the empire with far less military strength. Ultimately, the Janissaries had many responsibilities in the Ottoman Empire, including serving as the empire's primary military force, as the Sultan's personal guard, and in the Ottoman court. They were granted many rights in exchange for these responsibilities, including vast wealth, an elite social status, and immense political power. During times of war, their responsibilities were balanced with their rights. However, when there was peace in the empire, the Janissaries had few duties to perform, leading to them frequently rebelling to improve their rights, causing imbalance. This created great discord between the Janissaries and the Sultan, and eventually, Sultan Mahmud II disbanded the Janissaries for good. Being deprived of their military force was harmful for the Ottomans, leading to them losing great amounts of land over the next century, culminating in the fall of the Ottoman Empire after the events of World War I. Without the Ottoman Empire holding them together, the new territories that formed had many conflicts, largely caused by cultural and religious differences, accentuated by the culture and religion ignoring borders drawn by the victors of the war.